The old, leather-bound book lay open on the picnic table, its pages filled with faded Latin script and cryptic symbols. Emily traced a finger along the parchment, her brow furrowed. "Are we really going to do this?" she asked, her voice a low murmur against the backdrop of the rustling leaves. Jason grinned, a spark of reckless excitement in his eyes. "Of course we are. Imagine the thrill, Emily. To touch something ancient, something forbidden." He was always the instigator, the one who pushed the boundaries, even when they should probably remain untouched. Sarah, her long dark hair swaying in the gentle breeze, nodded eagerly. "Think of the energy we could harness," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. "The connection to something beyond our world." She had always been drawn to the mystical, the unseen. Mark, ever the pragmatist, shifted uncomfortably. "I still think this is a bad idea," he muttered. "A really bad idea." But his words were lost in the mounting excitement as they ventured deeper into the Blackwood Creek forest. The air grew heavy, the sunlight barely piercing the dense canopy. Of trees, an unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. The clearing, when they found it, was a perfect circle of bare earth, surrounded by towering, gnarled trees. An ancient energy pulsed beneath the surface, a tangible sense of something waiting, watching. The atmosphere grew heavy, an invisible weight pressing down on them. They set up their makeshift altar, placing candles and ritualistic tools around the clearing's edge. Jason, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, opened the book to the marked page. He began to recite the ancient verses, his voice echoing eerily through the silent forest. The others joined in, their voices trembling slightly. As the words flowed from their lips, a dark incantation into the heart of the wilderness. A sense of wrongness filled the air, the world around them seeming to hold its breath. Something was about to change. As the last syllable of the incantation faded into the stillness of the clearing, a palpable shift occurred. The air crackled. With unseen energy, the very ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like living things. A low, guttural hum emanated from the center of the clearing, growing in intensity, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. Jason, his eyes wide and unfocused, began to sway rhythmically, his body moving in a strange, jerky dance. His voice, now a distorted echo of its former self, joined the hum, chanting words that were no longer Latin, but some guttural, ancient tongue. A chill deeper than any winter wind settled over the clearing. "Jason, stop," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't right, but Jason didn't respond. He continued his unsettling dance, his movements becoming more erratic, more violent. Sarah, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fascination, reached out to touch his arm but recoiled as if burned. "Something's happening," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Something's coming through." The hum intensified, rising to a deafening roar. The shadows around them deepened, coalescing into swirling, formless shapes that writhed and pulsed with malevolent energy. A wind, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, whipped through the clearing, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into near-total darkness. Only the faint ethereal glow of the open book illuminated Jason's convulsing form. Suddenly, Jason's body convulsed violently, his head snapping back, his eyes rolling up into his skull. A strangled, inhuman scream tore through the night, a sound that seemed to claw at their very souls. Then silence. A heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. Jason stood motionless, his head bowed, his body still. Then slowly he raised his head, his eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, his lips curled into a grotesque parody of a smile. "We have been waiting," he said, his voice a chilling, raspy whisper, utterly unlike his own. Waiting for you. The entity, ancient and malevolent, had arrived. The air grew heavy. The very trees seemed to lean in, as if eager to witness the horror that was about to unfold. From the edges of the clearing, where darkness was absolute, shapes began to move, shadow-like figures drifting between the ancient trees. The scent of damp earth turned acrid, with a metallic undertone that made Emily's stomach clench. A low whispering started, not words, but a constant undercurrent of sound, like insects skittering across dry leaves. The transformation was horrific. Jason's body contorted, his bones audibly cracking and shifting beneath his skin. His eyes, now pools of malevolent light, darted around the clearing, fixated on each of them in turn. A low growl rumbled in his throat, a sound that was both animalistic and utterly alien. He moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, his limbs bending at impossible angles. "Jason," Emily whispered again, her voice thick with fear. "What's happening to you?" "Jason is gone," the entity rasped, its voice a chilling blend of Jason's and something else entirely. "We are here now." It lunged towards Sarah, its movements impossibly fast. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward, her hands outstretched as if to ward off the creature. Mark, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror, grabbed a thick branch from the ground, holding it like a makeshift weapon. "Stay away from her," he yelled, his voice cracking. The entity chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down Emily's spine. It moved towards Mark, its eyes fixated on him. With a speed that defied human capability, it snatched the branch from Mark's grasp, snapping it in two with a single, effortless motion. Mark stumbled backward, his eyes filled with a terror that mirrored Emily's own. "You cannot fight us," the entity hissed, its voice laced with amusement. "You cannot even comprehend us." It turned its attention to Sarah, who was cowering against a tree, her eyes wide with fear. "You sense us, don't you?" It purred, its voice sickeningly sweet. "You feel our presence in the shadows, in the spaces between worlds." Sarah whimpered, her body trembling. "Leave us alone," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Alone?" the entity scoffed. "We are never alone. We are the darkness, the fear, the emptiness that gnaws at your souls." It reached out, its hand hovering inches from Sarah's face. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the entity didn't touch her. Instead, it moved its hand slowly, tracing the contours of her face, its touch sending waves of icy dread through her body. "Such fear," it whispered, its voice filled with a perverse delight. "It sustains us. It feeds us." Suddenly it lashed out, its hand striking Sarah's face with brutal force. Sarah cried out, her cheek now marred with a deep bloody gash. The entity grinned, a grotesque display of sharp, pointed teeth. "Run!" Emily screamed, her voice hoarse with terror. "Run now!" She grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him towards the edge of the clearing. They stumbled through the darkness, their feet catching on roots and rocks, their lungs burning with exertion. Behind them, they could hear the entity's chilling laughter echoing through the trees, a promise of the horrors yet to come. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like 100 unseen eyes were tracking every movement. The sounds of the forest, once a soothing backdrop, had become a chorus of menace. The rustling of leaves sounded like whispers, and the snapping of twigs like approaching footsteps. They plunged into the dense undergrowth, the gnarled branches clawing at their faces and clothes. Emily, her heart pounding in her chest, glanced back over her shoulder. Jason, or rather the entity within him, was following, his movements unnervingly fluid and silent. His eyes, glowing like twin embers in the darkness, were fixed on them. Filled with a predatory hunger, the forest had become a labyrinth, a maze of twisted trees and tangled vines. The moon, hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, offered little light, and the darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating, consuming. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of terror through them. "Which way?" Mark gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "I don't know," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Just keep moving." They stumbled through the darkness, their feet finding purchase on slippery roots and loose stones. The entity was gaining on them, its footsteps silent, its presence a chilling weight in the air. Sarah, her face streaked with blood and tears, was struggling to keep up, her breath shallow and ragged. "I see things," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Images, visions, it's showing me things." "What kind of things?" Emily asked, her voice tight with fear. "Dark things," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "Things it wants to do to us, things it's done before." Suddenly, Sarah stopped, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. "There," she breathed, pointing towards a faint glow in the darkness. "A light!" They hurried towards the light, their hopes rising. As they drew closer, they saw that it was coming from a small, dilapidated shack, its windows boarded up, its roof sagging. It looked abandoned, but the faint light flickering through, the cracks in the boards suggested otherwise. "Maybe someone's there," Mark said, his voice laced with hope. They approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. Emily reached for the door, her hand trembling. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. The shack was small and cluttered, filled with strange symbols and ritualistic objects. A single candle flickered on a makeshift altar, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. In the center of the room, a figure sat hunched over a table. "There, back to them." "Hello?" Emily called out, her voice echoing through the silent shack. The figure didn't respond. It remained motionless, its head bowed. Emily took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you all right?" she asked. Suddenly, the figure raised its head, its eyes glowing with the same eerie light as Jason's, fixed on Emily. A chilling grin spread across its face, revealing rows of sharp-pointed teeth. "You should not have come here," it hissed, its voice a guttural growl. "Now you will join us." The figure lunged, its speed startling. Emily barely had time to react before. It seized Mark by the throat, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. Mark gasped for air, his eyes bulging. Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the shack. Emily, her mind racing, grabbed a heavy candlestick from the altar, her hand trembling. She hesitated, then struck the figure across the back of the head. The figure snarled, releasing Mark and turning its attention to Emily. Its eyes burned with hatred, its face a mask of rage. It moved towards her, its movements a blur of motion. Emily swung the candlestick again, but the figure caught her arm, its grip like iron. It twisted her arm, forcing her to drop the candlestick. "Foolish girl," it hissed, its voice a guttural growl. "You cannot harm us. We are beyond your comprehension." It threw Emily against the wall, her head striking the rough wooden planks with a sickening thud. Dazed and disoriented, Emily watched as the figure turned its attention to Sarah, who was cowering in a corner, her eyes wide with terror. "You see us, don't you?" The figure purred, its voice sickeningly sweet. "You feel our presence in the shadows, in the spaces between worlds," Sarah whimpered, her body trembling. "Leave us alone," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Alone?" The figure scoffed. "We are never alone. We are the darkness, the fear, the emptiness that gnaws at your souls." It reached out, its hand hovering inches from Sarah's face. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the figure didn't touch her. Instead, it moved its hand slowly, tracing the contours of her face, its touch sending waves of icy dread through her body. "Such fear," it whispered, its voice filled with a perverse delight. "It sustains us, it feeds us." Then it turned and moved back toward the table and began shuffling through several papers that littered the surface. Emily, her head still ringing from the impact, noticed strange diagrams and writing covering each page. With a surge of adrenaline and ignoring the intense pain now radiating through her body, she seized the papers and began quickly scanning. "The pages! What are you doing?" the creature hissed. "Finding a way to stop you," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm. "Impossible," the creature snarled. "Not impossible," Sarah said suddenly. "Old magic. Older still than even you." As Emily's eyes flew across the writing, she began to discern a pattern, a reversal, information that told of how to unmake what they had done. She began to speak the incantations haltingly at first, then more sure. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the shack and even made the ground tremble. It reached for Emily, then Sarah moved in front of it and grabbed the creature's arms. "Go," Sarah yelled at Emily. "I'll hold it, but hurry." With Sarah buying her precious time, Emily continued the reversed incantation, her voice growing stronger. With each word, the air in the shack crackled with energy, the shadows recoiling as if burned. The creature screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, its form flickering and distorting. "You cannot undo what has been done," it roared, its voice echoing through the shack, shaking the very walls. "We are bound to this world, bound to your fear." Sarah, her face pale and drawn, struggled to hold the creature back, her hands burning from its touch. "You're wrong," she gasped, her voice strained. "We can choose to be stronger than fear." Emily, her eyes fixed on the ancient text, felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. The words flowed from her lips, ancient syllables of banishment and release. The creature's form began to shimmer, its edges blurring as if it were being pulled apart atom by atom. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind died down, the rustling leaves fell silent. Even the distant hooting of an owl ceased. The clearing was a stage, and the final act was about to begin. Mark, still dazed but conscious, watched the unfolding scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. He saw the creature's form wavering, its eyes flickering like dying embers. He saw Emily, her face illuminated by the flickering candlelight, her voice ringing with newfound power. And he saw Sarah, her body trembling with exhaustion, her spirit unwavering. The creature let out a final, ear-splitting shriek, its form dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadow and smoke. The vortex contracted, shrinking into a tiny, pulsing point of darkness, then vanished entirely. The shack fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the three survivors. Sarah collapsed, her body limp and lifeless. Emily rushed to her, sighed, her heart sinking. She felt for a pulse but found none. "Sarah!" she cried, her voice choked with grief. Mark, his face pale and his eyes filled with sorrow, knelt beside them. The loss was a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair on them both. Emily, her mind still reeling from the confrontation, remembered that Jason was still out there, somewhere, still a vessel for the lingering darkness. She had to finish this. She had to end it. With a heavy heart, Emily left the shack, Mark following close behind. The forest was eerily silent, the darkness seeming to press in on them from all sides. They found Jason in the clearing, standing motionless, his back to them. He turned slowly, his eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent light. "You cannot escape us," he rasped, his voice a chilling blend of Jason's and the entity's. "We are eternal." "No," Emily said, her voice firm, despite the tremor of fear within her. "You're not. You're a parasite, feeding on fear. But we're not afraid anymore." She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Jason's. She raised her hand, her fingers tracing the symbol of banishment in the air. Jason recoiled, his face contorting in pain. "You cannot banish us," he shrieked, his voice filled with a desperate rage. "We are a part of you now." "No," Emily repeated, her voice steady. "You're not a part of me. You're nothing." The symbol glowed with a blinding light, its energy surging through the clearing. Jason's body convulsed violently, his form flickering and distorting. He let out a final, agonized scream, then collapsed to the ground, his body still and lifeless. The malevolent light in his eyes flickered and died, leaving only the empty shell of her friend. The clearing was silent, the air still heavy with the lingering echoes of the banishment. Emily stood alone, the weight of her grief and the horror of her experience pressing down on her. The bodies of her friends lay scattered around her, stark reminders of the price they had paid. The forest, once a place of adventure and excitement, was now a scene of tragedy, a graveyard of broken promises and shattered lives. Mark approached, his face etched with sorrow. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, his touch a silent offering of comfort. They stood together for a long moment, their eyes fixed on the lifeless form of Jason. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a pale, ethereal light across the clearing, illuminating the scene of devastation. "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "We leave," she said, her voice hollow. "We leave this place and never come back." They turned and walked away, their footsteps muffled by the carpet of leaves. The forest seemed to watch them go, its ancient trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like gnarled skeletal fingers. As they reached the edge of the forest, Emily paused, turning back for one last look. The clearing was shrouded in darkness, the shadows concealing the horrors that had unfolded within its boundaries. The feeling of being watched was still present, and a shiver ran down Emily's back. She felt eyes in the woods beyond the tree line. "Let's go," she said, and pulled Mark onward. They walked in silence, the weight of their experience pressing down on them. The events of the night replayed in Emily's mind, a horrifying montage of terror and loss. She thought of Sarah, her eyes filled with fear and determination, sacrificing herself to give Emily time. She thought of Jason, his body twisted and contorted by the malevolent entity, his voice a chilling blend of human and inhuman. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, they reached the edge of the town. The familiar sights and sounds of civilization were a stark contrast to the horrors they had witnessed in the forest. But even here, in the midst of normalcy, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The world seemed to have shifted, to have tilted on its axis, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same.